Hey, this is Joe Gilder from Home Studio Corner, and today we're going to talk about the 6 rules of compression. Now, let me just go ahead and preemptively say to the person who's dying to comment, there are no rules. Of course, there are no rules, but at the same time, there are. There's rules of music theory. Now, you can break those rules as much as you want, all the way to making atonal music that sounds like garbage, but these are the rules that I've come up with how I use compression in a way that works well for me and helps me get mixes that I'm proud of and that sound good to me. So if you're feeling like your compression game could use a little bit of a booster shot, that's what this video is for. It's going to help you get better mixes by getting a better handle on compression. Okay, we need some boxes for our rules because, rules tend to box us in. And, we push back against being boxed in. I get that. But boxes can be good and can be helpful. Now, of these 6 rules, I would say rule number 1 and rule number 6 are the most important. Rules 2 through 5, still important, but these are going to be the biggest game-changing ones for you if you get those under control. So let's zoom in and let's talk about rule number 1. Rule number 1 is very simple, but very important. And it's simply this: don't compress everything. You can call it human nature if you want, but there's something about having a tool that we love and that we know how to use that makes us want to put it on everything. The same is true for EQ or reverb. Too much of a good thing is, of course, a bad thing. So just because you look over and you see your insert section on your channels and you think, oh, it would be so nice to put a big, fat, juicy compressor plug-in right here, don't do it. Don't do it. If the track needs it, sure. But before you put any plug-in on a track, you should be able to answer the question, why am I putting it on this track? What sound am I going for? What's not in the track? What's not happening here that requires me to put a compressor on the track? Otherwise, you might just want to leave it alone. I've had so many mixes where I put nothing on some of the tracks, and that ends up being the best decision, okay? Don't compress everything. All right, rule number 2, once you've decided that you want to use some compression, try this. Try compressing the bus first. Now, what do I mean by the bus? Let's imagine, the easiest explanation for this is to imagine we've got a bunch of drum tracks. So let's say we've got a bunch of drum tracks here. These are faders. Can't you tell? They're beautiful. And so these are things like, we got our kick drum, our snare, tom, overhead, room mics, okay? Now, all of these are typically, if you set your session up kind of the way I do, these are all routed to our drum bus, which I usually call like drums in all caps. The best place, in my opinion, to put a compressor is right here. If you're thinking about compressing your drums, why not put the compressor on the drums bus first? You can always go back and put it on individual channels as well. But a lot of times, if I know that I want to compress the kick drum and the snare drum, and then, a lot of times, especially in Nashville, they like to put compressors on the rooms. I could do all that, but what if I could just do one compressor here on my drum bus, and that solved all my problems? That did some compression on the kick, and also the snare, and also the rooms, with just one single compressor. That's the approach I like to take. This is what I call, backwards mixing or top-down mixing. One compressor here can maybe do the job across 5 or 10 or 12 tracks to where maybe I don't end up needing a compressor on my kick drum or my snare drum, or I can compress it differently because this compressor is already giving me some of the tone that I want. Now, the important thing here is to just try this. You don't always do it. There are times when I don't do that, but especially on drums, I find this works really, really well. Okay, rule number 3 has to do with the age-old question, which do I do first, EQ or compress? I've got a basic rule of thumb that works really well for me. So, it's kind of a two-parter. That's supposed to be an ear. If it sounds good, compress first, okay? The second part of this, that's a better ear, sounds bad, EQ first, okay? So what do I mean by good and bad? Obviously, we want to get things right, and we want to make our track sound as good as possible at the source. But sometimes that doesn't happen. And what happens with compression tends to just amplify. So if we take a track that has a lot of good and a lot of bad and we compress it, we're just turning up both the good and the bad. No matter what we do, good and bad get turned up. However, if we use some EQ, let's say there's just a few bad frequencies in that channel, we can turn those bad frequencies down a little bit, get them more in control so that there's less bad in relation to the good. The bad is like this size and the good is this size. Now, if we come in and we slap a compressor on this and the compressor's turning up both the good and the bad, look, now it's turning up the good and the bad is staying lower in relation to it. Okay, so if you think about it, use the EQ to fix some problems and then use the compression to do its thing and to enhance things. All right, rule number 4 has to do with the attack knob, and it's very simple. Treat your attack knob as if it is an aggression control. In other words, how aggressive do you want your compressor to be? So if you set up a compressor with kind of the normal, 2-to-1 ratio, and the threshold's in a spot where it's compressing just a decent amount, a few dB, and then you would take your attack knob and you turn that sucker down, so you're going from, let's say, 30 milliseconds over here down to 1 millisecond over here. Guess what? By doing nothing else but changing the attack time, you're going to see more compression on your compressor. You're going to look at the gain reduction meter and you're going to see that with the 30 millisecond attack, it was maybe compressing this much. And then when you brought it down to 1 millisecond, it's compressing this much. We're basically just saying, I want you to attack more of the signal, be more aggressive in your attack because it's faster. And so we end up with more compression. So if you think about it that way, that's what these things that usually have fast attack times, like, for example, I don't know, vocals and snare drums. A lot of times we use, if I were to say what channels, what kind of audio do I tend to use the most aggressive compression on, it'd be stuff like this, because the faster attack times grab the vocals and the snare in such a way that sounds really cool and pleasing. So it doesn't mean I have to have a ton of compression happening. It just means when it's compressing, it has more of an aggressive quality to it. The opposite is also true. If we go from 1 millisecond and we turn the knob back over to 30 milliseconds, we get a smoother compression. We get less aggression there. So think of it in terms of aggression. Rule number 5, you might have guessed, has something to do with the release time. So if attack is aggression, then your release time is your tone. So I think of the release knob as a tone knob. So I'm a guitar player. Tone knobs on my guitars and on different pedals that I have change the overall sound of what's happening. And that to me is what release does more than anything else. It's affecting the tone. So let's transform this attack knob into a release knob now. And let's do the same thing we did before. If we set the release at something like 30 milliseconds versus 1 millisecond, what happens? So let's start with the 30 millisecond one. So here's our waveform. This is kind of the journey of the waveform here, okay? The waveform starts, compressor turns it down, and then the slow release happens, okay? So it goes on this journey kind of like that, all right? So that's with the 30 millisecond. Now, what if we turned it down to 1 millisecond release time? What happens then? Well, here's kind of what that would look like. The beginning does the same, comes back down, but then it comes back up. So the release, which is kind of right here on the audio, is pretty quick. So if you compare these two, all things being equal, this one lets the sound back in more slowly, this one lets the sound back in more quickly. Now let's imagine this is like a waveform, like a kick drum, where the beginning goes boom, and then the end goes whoom. If we have a slow release like this, that whoom is going to get turned down when we turn down the whoom. So this would sound like on a kick drum, something like this. Boom. This, on the other hand, the release is allowing the rest of the signal to come back in pretty quickly. So this would sound like boom, boom, boom. And then you can adjust the release time. So if we adjust it anywhere in between, then we get variations of this. So maybe instead of waiting that long, it goes boom, boom, or it goes boom. You see what I'm saying? You can let as much or as little as you want back in by adjusting your release knob. And finally, arguably the most important rule, especially if you're going to find yourself using quite a bit of compression, always, 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 always level match your compression. What do I mean by that? Let's take, for example, let's say we're going in and here's two of our signals. Here's the before and here's the after. And then somewhere in the middle is compression. So compression's happening here. Here's the signal going in. This is the input of the compressor. This is the output of the compressor. A lot of times what we end up doing, let's say the input is coming in like this. That's the level of the input. We do our thing with compression, and that's the output. We've made it louder. And guess what? If it's louder, we tend to think it's better. So we may go through, take a bunch of tracks that were at this level, compress them till they're at that level, and we think, hot dog, look how much better it sounds. No, louder is not better. What would be better is to take the input and then do our compression thing, have lots of fun with it, but then make sure that the output is the same as the input. Make sure that the before and after are exactly the same. In other words, if you're using, something like Studio One, you know how the plugins have this power button on there? If you've got that and you engage and disengage, you bypass the plugin, the levels of each should sound the same. That way you can hear, okay, what is this compression actually doing? Instead of just seeing, is it making it louder? Is it making it better? And by doing that, you'll realize, I actually made it worse with a compressor. Or, wow, I actually made it a whole lot better. So this is hugely important. And maybe it's the opposite. The input signal is way up here and you compressed and turned it down. Same thing. You may think it sounds better here because it's louder, but reality, this was a better sounding signal and better for the mix, but you just couldn't tell because they weren't balanced. That's why every compressor you ever use will have some sort of what they call, sometimes it's called gain, sometimes it's just called makeup gain. And it's just a knob that allows you to adjust the volume of that output of the compressor so that you can match what's coming in and what's going out. That alone, if you don't do anything else, that alone right there will help you make better compression decisions because you're not working with one hand tied behind your back. You're listening to the same thing before. All right, so those are the 6 rules of compression. I hope this was helpful. What rules do you have that I missed out on? Leave a comment below and let me know. Hey, thanks so much for watching this video. I hope it was well worth your while, and I hope you get better mixes as a result. If you'd like to check out my 5-step mix guide, which will take you kind of through my process of taking a mix from the starting line all the way meandering to the finish, that will help you do it, and it's a quick and easy read. Just go to 5stepmix.com for your free copy. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.